All right, let's now speak or link up with the General Secretary of the National Council of Churches Kenya that has just a few minutes ago released or given a press briefing with regard to some of the top issues the country is currently grappling with. One of them being matters elections and the impasse that is currently being witnessed with just 21 days, exactly 3 weeks to go to the fresh presidential elections as per the Supreme Court ruling that was delivered about a month ago. Join me now, Canon Peter Karanja, live from Limuru. Many thanks for joining us here on KTN News Desk. We appreciate your time. A lot has been happening. Yesterday, we saw the IEBC separately meet NASA and Jubilee, of course, led by Deputy President William Ruto. We also know that the Select Committee is currently receiving views from the public, but there still seems to be no clear way forward on whether indeed the country is ready for an election or not. What is the church's voice in this?
Thank you very much for having me. I think what is not in this dispute by any Kenyans is that the constitutional imperative to hold the elections on the 26th of October 2017 within 60 days of the judgment annulling the election of 8th of October for the presidential election is fixed and cannot be moved. The position of the church is that it is imperative for all actors, especially NASA and Jubilee, to move away from sideshows, prepare themselves and mobilize their supporters towards the election, because we do need to hold the election and move the country to the next level, because not doing so and overshooting the 60 days would place the country in jeopardy, because we go outside the constitutional structure and guidelines, and there is no guidance on what happens next. It would be very reckless in our view, and this is what we have said in our statement, for the political leaders seeking political office to push the country in that direction.
But looking at some of the issues that NASA says they have, some of the points they've raised and the irreducible minimums they have for the IEBC in a bid for them to participate in an election. The church hasn't seemingly said much about some of these issues that are being raised by the political players. Do you think that NASA has valid points that they are raising with regard to this election?
We've actually addressed that in the statement that we have issued. We recognize that some of the demands do appear to make sense, both in NASA and Jubilee, but evaluating them, we don't think they are matters of life and death. And 3 weeks to the election, the program committee of NCCK has called upon NASA and Jubilee to drop all their demands and go to the election. It is important for Kenyans to be aware that the outcome of this election, if it is not satisfactory to anyone, can be contested in court, which is within the constitutional rights and provisions that are available. Nobody should take us outside the Constitution when there is a constitutional route to address grievances if they should arise. And this is also borne by a clear effort by IBC to listen to all parties and prepare for the elections and mitigate against some of the gaps that they may have had that led to the annulment of the last election. Unless we give them a chance to run the election, we cannot, this side of the election, say whether they are capable or not of holding the election, and that their infrastructure is inadequate. We need to test it. Thank you.
Talk to us about the electoral amendments, the proposed changes to some of the electoral laws we have that is being spearheaded by the Jubilee Party.
We've had a time to look at them in detail. We spent substantial time on them. On the face of it, some of them look meritorious, but considering that this is a very poisoned political environment, and the elections are only 3 weeks away, and the chairman of IBC has said within the current provisions of the law, he's able to mount a free, fair, and credible election. The mind of the program committee of NCCK is Jubilee also should suspend the process on the amendments, revisit them after the elections, and we focus our energies on getting this election done and right.
From this conversation, what I'm getting out of it is this: the church is interested in having elections in the next 3 weeks, is interested in the country not being in constitutional crisis in the event that elections are not held in the next 3 weeks, regardless of the issues that are being raised by either NASA or Jubilee, and both of them claim this is the only way we will have a free, fair, and credible election.
Well, we hear them. These are stakeholders in the process. Jubilee is a political party. NASA is a coalition. Their mandate is to campaign and seek for votes. It is the constitutional mandate of IEBC to run the election. I don't think anybody has any basis and reason to tell Kenyans that we cannot have an election, because it's the Kenyans who vote, it's the IEBC that manages the election, and if the parties are not happy, they can go to court. I don't think they have the competence to tell us we are not ready for the elections. They are endangering the lives of Kenyans and the future of this nation by profiling concerns that may be legitimate beyond national interests.
The church has time and again been accused of not doing enough to salvage the situation when it's needed to step forward. This whole year, the country has been on a political mood, and seemingly we still are in that mood until when another president will be sworn in, or definitely if President Uhuru Kenyatta will get re-elected in the fresh presidential election. And time and again, the church has been accused of taking sides. What are your thoughts on that?
First, the church is never shy about being accused. My view is always the church is the institution that can take flak when there is cause or not. I think Kenyans have not forgotten that last year when there was a crisis around IEBC, it was actually the church that drove the process of mediation that resulted in the safe removal of the Hassan IEBC and the recruitment of the new commissioners that are in place. And the crisis that was festering then appeared unstoppable unless there was an intervention. And the church said then it was important for us to address the crisis around the IEBC last year, because by doing so, we would help prepare for an election. The church considers it reckless for the politicians to involve Kenyans in sideshows around this time, because 2 months, 60 days after the judgment for holding another election, it is not time that is adequate to make any meaningful changes at IEBC, even if there was a problem. And the court did not ask that you restructure IEBC. It directed the IEBC to hold elections. The church doesn't always jump in the fray and engage on everything. We make an evaluation and ask what is redemptive and what is meaningful. I think we have roguish politicians who maybe have baggage that they carry and appear to be shy to do what is necessary to help mount the elections, and the threats that are being issued across the Jubilee and NASA and to Kenyans, I think are uncalled for. The church calls for discipline. If politicians become indisciplined, you don't blame the church, you blame the politicians.
So apart from the statements that are constantly being issued by the NCCK and, of course, the clergy at large, what else are you doing to just try and solve the current impasse that the country finds itself in? With just 3 weeks to go to the election, are you calling for dialogue? Are you up for mediation? What's the plan?
Well, the Bible says, come now, let us reason together. So dialogue is a standing commitment of the church and an encouragement to people where there are disputes. But 3 weeks to the elections, I think the church would like to see energies focused towards the elections. IEBC, as the election manager, is within its constitutional mandate to remain in conversation with NASA and Jubilee so that any debris and issues that need attention can be addressed. And when necessary to bring them together, they should bring them together. I think the church and other non-state actors like the KEPSA and including the diplomats are in different ways engaged with both parties, I think in an intense way, calling for sobriety and great responsibility in managing this space, which is very delicate, so that we can have an election. I restate, this is a constitutional and legal process that has a recourse in the law and the Constitution if a party is aggrieved. There is no constitutional mechanism of managing a process before an election if there are disputes. Compliance with the law is the critical thing that I would call upon the players. We have also said that maybe part of the reason why the stakes are so high with Kenyan elections is because we try to resolve underlying issues that the politicians and Kenyans have not looked at keenly before elections, at elections which cannot be resolved with elections. The matter of a sense of exclusivity that is rampant in this country. You form government, the winner takes all, the loser loses everything. That is the structure of the Constitution. And one of the reasons why people are so agitated about this election is because some of them ask, if we lose the election, where do we go? And I think it is the responsibility of both Jubilee and NASA to own up to this challenge and go to Parliament after the election and make a constitutional amendment that will enable Kenya to dignify the opposition and facilitate it to play its role. And this opposition can either be Jubilee or NASA after the election, as well as expand government, the executive, within the party or coalition that wins, so that additional positions are created to enable us achieve greater inclusivity in the government and ownership by the Kenyans in general. I think it is these rather redemptive things that energies should now be directed towards after this election, so that we don't find ourselves in the same place every 5 years where everything comes to a standstill because it is a life and death matter who wins the election, as though there is nothing else to do for those who want to serve Kenyans.
So the church's position currently, from what I can pick from what you're saying, is that you need NASA to stop with the demands, first the irreducible minimums, and of course call off the demonstrations that are currently there on Mondays and Fridays. And you also need Jubilee to stop with the legislation they're trying to push forward for the amendment of the election laws in the country.
This is our call, honestly, because I don't think any point is now being made by NASA that has not been made. The country has very patiently supported the electoral process. Kenyans have paid a very dear price. A number of people through this electoral process have already lost their lives. You remember the demonstrations after the announcement of the results, after the 8th of August elections. I think Kenyans need a break. They should be allowed to make choices as we go to the elections and not be taken on sideshows. I think the Kenyan voter is the senior person. They should not be made to be subordinate to political processes. Parliament is in session. It has 5 years to make and amend laws. I think Jubilee should give us a break as well. Let us make legislative amendments after the elections. We can live through with the provisions of the laws that are available now.
This then means that none of the concerns that are being raised by either party, the church doesn't think none of the issues that are being raised or proposals that are being made will make the election we are heading up for in the next 3 weeks a better process.
You know, I think we must ask all Kenyans and those who are in constitutional and legal institutions and framework in the election value chain to recognize that the purpose of the elections is to help Kenyans make up their minds about who should lead them at the various levels. And I think the IBC should do its work, the law enforcement should do its work, the judiciary should do its work. I think the fears and the anxieties that are being reflected by the Jubilee amendments and the demands of NASA are more an expression of mistrust between Kenyans. And this cannot be cured by amendments to the law. This cannot be cured by even fulfilling more conditions brought by NASA. We had all those things done in the election of 8th, and we still ended up with a problem. We should challenge Kenyans to rise to the occasion and being patriotic in their call of duty, do what they must do to help Kenyans move across 26th of October. That doesn't mean that if any player has a matter that IBC should address, they shouldn't go raise it and ask that it is given intention. What is not acceptable is people telling us we shall not hold elections because that is not constitutional, and Kenyans ought not to be threatened by anyone anymore. We should go to the election, determine the outcome, and let the nation move on.
Canon Peter Karanja, thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News Desk. Is joining us live from Limuru. Reverend Canon Peter Karanja is the General Secretary of the National Council of Churches Kenya, weighing in on the electoral umpires currently being witnessed in the country, the amendments being spearheaded by Jubilee, the demonstrations and irreducible minimums that NASA has in a bid for them to participate in the election. Let's take a quick break here on